All right, so we got this book title, and I'm not going to lie. At first glance, it was better before. Sounds kind of like, that familiar tune our parents hum about the good old days when a candy bar cost a nickel.
Right.
But we're talking about Michel Serres here, the French philosopher.
Yeah.
That guy's brilliant. Surely there's more to this than just, complaining about the price of baguettes, right?
Oh, absolutely. This book, published back in 2017, it's Serres' way of tackling this thing we all experience, nostalgia, but he does it with this playful, insightful twist.
Playful and insightful, just like Serres himself.
Exactly. He uses France, like a case study almost, comparing it then and now, to kind of poke fun at how much we tend to romanticize the past.
So it's not just the French who are obsessed with those good old days. We're all guilty of it.
100%.
Yeah.
And Serres, he sets this up perfectly, introduces these two figures, Grandpapa Ronchon, literally, grumpy grandpa stuck in the past, and Petite Poucette, little thumb, representing the younger generation glued to their smartphones.
Oh man, I can already picture Grandpapa Ronchon shaking his fist at those kids on the lawn.
Right.
But are these actual characters in the book, or more like symbols Serres uses?
They're archetypes representing these two totally different views we have on progress. And the brilliant thing is, Serres, he ties in his own life experiences, talks about growing up in Europe during wartime compared to the decades of relative peace that followed.
Talk about a real-world example of things changing, even if Grandpapa Ronchon wants to grumble about it, huh?
Absolutely. And that actually leads perfectly into Serres' first main point, what he calls the tyranny of before.
The tyranny of before. Okay, sounds intense. Break it down for us. What's he getting at with that?
It's like he's taking those rose-tinted glasses we all wear and just shattering them.
Love it. So he's saying before wasn't as rosy as we remember.
Not even close. He reminds us that back then, something as simple as a cut could kill you. Dying from an infection was more common than dying in a war. Forget about all the medical advancements we take for granted now.
It's easy to forget that when you're busy complaining about your wifey speed, right?
Exactly.
But before we get too comfortable patting ourselves on the back for our modern marvels, Serres hits us with part 2, and this is a good one, the price of progress.
Right. There's always a trade-off.
So what's the catch? What are we giving up in the name of progress, according to Serres?
He argues that even the positive changes, they come at a cost. He talks about how, hygiene is great, but it's also led to the loss of certain, let's call them freedoms.
Wait, what kind of freedoms go out the window with hand washing? You got to elaborate on that one.
All right, picture this. In Serres' time, people rarely washed their clothes, let alone change their underwear regularly. He mentions this whole scandal caused by Elle magazine suggesting that, gasp, women should change their underwear daily.
Okay, that's different. Maybe I won't complain about my laundry pileup for a bit.
It puts things in perspective, right?
It really does. But what other prices is Serres talking about? This is making me see progress in a whole new light.
Well, he gets into the decline of manual trades, which was a big one for him personally. He talks about how tough farm life was, the sheer physical labor involved, and even his own pride in knowing how to use a sextant, which is basically useless now, thanks to GPS.
I get that. My phone can identify any song playing anywhere. Mm-hmm. But there's something cool about being able to, actually read sheet music. It's a different kind of connection.
Exactly. And Serres isn't saying ditch technology and go back to churning butter by hand, but it's about recognizing that progress, it's not always a straight line upwards. It's messy.
Right. So we've got the tougher times before, but maybe also something more, authentic. Mm-hmm. But then Serres connects all of this to power. That feels like a jump.
Not at all. This is where his argument gets really interesting, really relevant to us today. He calls it the shifting landscape of power.
All right, I'm hooked. Lay it on me. How does it all connect?
He uses the Eiffel Tower as this perfect example. So it represents this top-down way of communication, old media being challenged by these decentralized networks the internet.
Whoa, I never thought about the Eiffel Tower like that. But it makes sense. This massive monument to a certain era of technology. And now here we are. Information isn't controlled by a select few anymore. It's everywhere.
Exactly. And Serres argues this is democratizing knowledge in a way we've never seen before. But just like everything else, it's not that simple.
Right. Because on one hand, information is everywhere. But on the other hand, you got misinformation spreading like wildfire too.
Exactly. And that's actually what makes Serres' or Eiffel Tower example so perfect, Because this shift he's talking about, it's not just about technology. It's about who has the power to shape the story we hear.
Now you're talking. That's what gets me fired up.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get lost in the chaos of it all, But then, Serres, he throws us a curveball. He finds optimism in all this power shifting. Something about embracing smallness.
He does, and that's where a lot of folks misunderstand him. He's not saying we all need to, like, shrink away and let the world pass us by or anything.
Okay, good, because I was picturing, like, tiny houses and communicating only through emojis or something. So if it's not literal smallness, then what's he talking about?
It's like a shift in mindset for both individuals and even whole nations. He brings up extinction.
Yeah.
You know, those species so focused on being the biggest, the strongest, they ended up wiping themselves out.
Right, dinosaurs and all that.
Exactly. But the ones that adapted, that collaborated, the ones that didn't need to dominate, those were the survivors.
So it's not about actual size. It's about letting go of that whole, like, win-lose mentality that's driven so much of history, which we really think about it is a pretty radical idea.
It is. And Serres sees this reflected in how Petit Poucet, that younger generation, they experience the world. They're growing up interconnected, aware of global issues in a way we never were.
I guess that's true with the internet and all.
Right. He sees the potential for them to create a more equitable, sustainable future.
Okay, but let's get real for a sec. Petit Poucet is also the generation glued to their phones, scrolling through endless bad news and comparing themselves to everyone else's highlight reels.
True. And Serres, he doesn't try to sugarcoat the downsides of all this technology. It's all about nuance, right? But he also sees this access to information as a tool, you know? It's made us more aware of social injustices, past and present.
That's a good point. Like, back in the day, people didn't really talk about things like domestic violence or certain other abuses so openly.
Right.
But now, thanks to, well, social media, the internet, those things are harder to ignore. So maybe it's not all doom and gloom with Petit Poucet.
Exactly. Serres argues this interconnectedness, even with its flaws, it has the potential for positive change. He even points out how, back then, people would marvel at the fact that different regions in France had their own cheeses.
Which, let's be real, is pretty cool.
Right. It shows how isolated people were, not just physically, but culturally, too.
It's crazy to think about, right? I can order cheese from halfway across the world with a few taps on my phone.
Yeah.
Sure, maybe some things are better made locally back then, but that kind of connection to the wider world, that's pretty amazing too.
And Serres argues that exposure to different cultures, different perspectives, even through something like cheese, it can help break down those barriers of us versus them that fueled so much conflict in the past.
You know, you're making me rethink my whole attitude towards those intimidating cheese boards at parties. Less, ew, what is that? And more like, tell me about this cheese from your childhood.
Right.
But all this talk about connection, about change, makes you wonder, are those in power really on board with this whole smallness revolution? Like, are they really going to give up their cheese boards that easily?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Serres doesn't shy away from it. He actually argues that the progress we've made, longer lifespans especially, it's led to kind of like a resurgence of this it was better before mindset.
Hold on, wait. How does living longer make people more nostalgic for the past? I would think it'd be the opposite.
It's not just nostalgia, it's about resisting change, you know?
Yeah.
People live longer, they accumulate more wealth, and with that, often power. And those in power throughout history, they like to hold on to that power. Even if holding on to it means holding everyone else back, you know?
So Grandpapa Ronchon, even with his outdated views, is kind of winning. Like, is that what you're saying? It's like, the more things change, the more some people want to hit the brakes, huh?
Exactly. And Serres sees this everywhere, you know, from political movements trying to rewind the clock to some, like, idealized past to the pushback against things like climate action, you know. It's that fear of the future. And it's often coming from the folks who benefited most from how things used to be. And that fear, it makes progress feel impossible.
Okay, that's not exactly uplifting. You know? So are we doomed to repeat history here, or does Serres offer some glimmer of hope? Because at this point, I'm ready to start hoarding cheese and building a bunker.
No need for the bunker just yet. Serres, he doesn't give us easy answers, but he does leave us with a challenge, you know?
Yeah.
He wants us to question this whole idea of greatness that's driven so much conflict throughout history.
So not about countries or people being the best, it's about something else.
Right. True progress, he says. It's about cooperation. It's about interconnectedness. Remember those adaptable species we were talking about?
Yeah.
The ones that survived by working together, not trying to outcompete each other into extinction? Serres, he sees that as a model for us, you know, a way forward.
So what's that look like in real life? We all gonna hold hands and share our cheese now, or what?
Well, maybe not a group hug, but yeah, it starts with each of us taking a look at our own nostalgia, right? Recognizing how clinging to how things used to be, it can blind us to what's possible right now.
It's like we're so busy trying to win, to be great, that we've forgotten how to just be better.
Right.
Better to each other, better to the planet. It's a lot to process, but I gotta say, this whole deep dive with you, it's been eye-opening.
I agree. Definitely gives us a lot to think about. And in the end, Serres, he leaves us with more questions than answers, which I think is kind of the point. He wants us to really think critically about progress, about what truly matters in a world that's constantly changing.
So it's not, it was better before. It's more like, how can we make the future better than what came before?
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Well, we've definitely given our listeners a lot to chew on today. What do you think? Are we headed for that Grandpapa Ronchon future, or does Petite Poussette have a shot? We want to hear from you. Hit us up on social media, find us at The Deep Dive, and until next time, remember, just because something seems simpler doesn't mean it actually was.